Welcome back to the Owning Your Success interview series, where we deep dive with inspiring people, just like you and me, who have made it in the professional world and really explore what it took to get them there. Sitting in front of me is Claire Rosenberg, who has over 10 years of professional experience and a career spanning Australia, China, Asia Pacific, and Europe. Claire is driven by her passion for creative problem solving, developing and mentoring others. And she really values challenging assumptions, disrupting the status quo, and promoting diversity to drive innovation. She is currently leading the Lego Group's physical distribution for Australia and New Zealand, as well as volunteering across several non-for-profits supporting women, and also learning to code Python. A graduate of the Australian Institute of Company Directors, and she also achieved a distinction in her master's degree in manufacturing from the University of Cambridge, despite having an undergraduate in finance. So maybe that's something we can talk a bit about later. Claire, I hope I've done your incredible achievements to date justice. Let me hand over to you for a quick self-introduction, and you can fill in some of the gaps that I might have missed.
Cool. Thanks very much, Charlie. So hi, everyone. Great to be with you today. So as Charlie mentioned, my career has been an interesting one in terms of location. So I've lived and worked in a few countries to date. My longest living overseas probably was in London for 5 years, where I was doing a number of global and regional roles for Europe. Generally always in the supply chain or digital transformation space related to supply chain. So whether that's been demand planning, supply planning, manufacturing planning, or even helping build some software for supply chain planning with the support of some very talented technical professionals.
So Claire, I already dropped a little bit of extra information about you. You actually studied finance at university, if I'm not mistaken, but you've entered the world of supply chain. So how did that all start, and how did your journey in the corporate career really commence?
Yeah, that's an interesting one, actually. So I started a degree in commerce, actually. Started off in economics, and then I decided, actually, there's a bit much algebra for me. Interestingly, I chose to pivot to finance, which had even more algebra, so I kind of got stuck with that one, and ended up in a career which is largely driven by linear regression models. So who knows? You can never get away from maths. But I started off in finance. I kind of did an internship at an Australian bank in China. A few weeks of that was enough to say to me, it's not really a career I'm after. In terms of the content, I didn't really feel like I was driven by their objectives and the goals of that business. And so I decided to give supply chain a go, and found I was really passionate about it, and kind of has evolved from there, really.
What were some of the early lessons you learnt at L'Oreal with regard to building your career?
I think a lesson was an early one, but also continues to be an ongoing one, is kind of, you generally, when you start in your roles, kind of go through a process of you unconsciously don't know what you're doing, and that's something I struggle with. So I tend to kind of double down, and have been known to, not that I'd advocate for this now, being a bit older and wiser, but work through weekends and so on to try and get on top of things and feel like I'm really confident in the knowledge. And I think early on in my career, I probably had a mild panic attack that I'd done something terrible to a supply plan, which had a big impact. But in reality, I hadn't. For sure, any new role, I think you always go through these stages of kind of not knowing what you're doing, learning what you're doing, and then the risky stage of not knowing what you don't know until you learn and make those mistakes and become truly confident.
So it's often the case, right, that we experience these moments of vulnerability throughout our career. Do you have an example of a time where you really felt totally out of your comfort zone, totally stressed beyond your mind, and what did you do to get through that?
So I had this amazing opportunity with L'Oreal to go and work and live in China. So took that opportunity, and then lo and behold, this opportunity to go and study in the UK did come up. And then I was extremely torn. I'd been in China for about 6 months at this point and had to make this decision. And at the time, I guess I didn't have a huge network around me to kind of talk through those things. So I kind of was spending a lot of late night calls back home to Australia to try and talk it through. But ultimately, in the end, I had to make that decision. It was really hard to kind of leave what I perceived at the time of age 26, a once-in-a-lifetime job in China, to go and do a once-in-a-lifetime master's degree. And after toying and throwing for a little while, I ultimately decided to go to the UK and resigned. And yeah, spent a year doing a master's degree. 100% was the best decision I ever made. I think there's always going to be opportunities, to go and work in different places, but sometimes, taking a year out to study is quite a unique one. So
I think what I pick up on there, and I think is really important, is that you had to make the choice in the end. You could talk and flesh it out with as many people as you like, but in the end, only Claire knows what's good for Claire. Or what is it that you did to really make that choice for yourself? What was the conversation that you had with yourself, and what really pushed you to make the call?
Ultimately, I think at the end of the day, I was kind of got to the point of saying, well, does this, and I have to say, I think I'd got to a point of almost being in total confusion in my head about this, because I kind of was so unsure about what to do. But I think ultimately you kind of have to say, okay, if I don't take this opportunity right now, will I have that opportunity again? And I think that's where I got to a point of saying, well, yes, I probably, if I so desire, I could find another role in an international post overseas again. But would I be able to go and study again at this particular moment in this course? And I've kind of said, okay, well, that's the kind of the once in a lifetime at this pivotal moment. So let's go with that one. And yeah, I it proved to be true. And I did manage to find another international job after that, and quite a few, you could say.
Yeah, that's it, right? Well, fortune does favor the brave. Okay, so in this sort of space, when you were in the UK, you were doing your master's, you were sort of in a position where you were sort of, stepping out again, kind of, re-entering back into the corporate world. What sort of lessons did you take the second time around?
It was easier for sure, because, interview questions, it wasn't so hypothetical. You could talk about concrete examples and so on. Whenever you're going through a tough time in a role, whatever that role is, it always makes sense to note down some of those examples, because quite often they're helpful in the next job interview you're doing. And that's something I often tell people when I'm mentoring them these days. I think it was definitely a challenge, but certainly a little bit easier than the first time around.
What about in terms of sort of, because you've actually shifted a few sort of different cultures of organizations as well. When you're selecting a company to work for, what is it that you are looking for?
Yeah, it's very interesting. I mean, I'm very fortunate at the company I'm at now. It's super flexible, and it's very non-hierarchical. Versus probably coming from a more traditional company, which is more hierarchical, probably a bit more formal in terms of culture.
I know, Claire, you have worked in predominantly, again, supply chain operations, innovation, tech, which are predominantly male dominated. And as you mentioned in your intro, you are also very passionate about celebrating diversity in the world of innovation, and also supporting women through the various non-profit actions that you're taking. Maybe you can share some of those experiences that you have faced, and why is it that you're so passionate about supporting women in this environment?
Yeah, I mean, it's certainly true. I've always been in probably quite often the lone female in the meeting room. It's really about kind of how do we lift each other up, and really make sure that we can ultimately drive better results. Because I think if you look into the research, quite often, for example, companies with women on boards do perform better. And I think that kind of filters right through the organization. I guess I had some experiences when I was younger that maybe made me feel probably not so equal to male colleagues. And that's really driven my passion and made sure that I will, speak out in support of younger colleagues, and encourage them to speak out as well, and kind of ensure that they have the best possible career journey that they can have.
It's interesting. So if you were sort of to give, and so for these younger sort of people that you're looking to uplift and support, what sort of advice can you give them to make sure that they are well equipped to sort of survive in this world, which is currently not equal, where they do have additional challenges in front of them? What are some of the advice that you give to them?
I think the number one thing I'd suggest is always back yourself. I think, as cliche as it sounds, often imposter syndrome is a real problem for a lot of people, of both genders, but particularly women are susceptible to it. A classic example might be there's a job ad and you only tick 9 out of 10 boxes, and you might be a bit umming and ahhing of whether or not you should apply, whereas actually there's a guy down the road who only ticks 5 out of 10 boxes and he's going to apply. I think it's important to remember that unless you apply, you're actually not going to get an interview, and you might be able to demonstrate in that interview that even though you only tick 9 out of those 10 boxes, you've got another 5 boxes that aren't listed in the job ad that you can actually offer to that organization that is super valuable to them. So it's really important to put yourself out there and back yourself. I think the other thing I would suggest, and I think as we get more senior in our careers, we can all help to do this, is calling out behavior that sometimes isn't as inclusive to everyone.
Well, Claire, we're coming towards the end, and I just sort of want to ask you one more question before I do my little wrap up. And that is, I've always been so impressed, Claire, by your ability to keep moving. To me, you are never sitting still. You're always pushing yourself to sort of, move to the next stage of your career. So I'm just curious, what is it that you're taking into account? What's your process in terms of planning your career, and how do you determine, what steps to take next?
Tough question. Well, I guess I would say I can't sit still very long, as you say. I tend to kind of like to sink my teeth into a role, kind of try and excel at it, learn from it what I can, and then find the next big challenge, right? You kind of want to look at perhaps where I want to be in kind of 10, 15, 20 years and say, okay, well, what kind of experiences do I need to get there? And maybe that means, not getting the next promotion up the ladder, but actually taking a couple of lateral experiences.
And so really reflecting upon your journey, I think the first thing that popped up was that at the beginning, there was a lot of test and learn. You were trying out economics, you moved into finance, you tried to, you sought out an intern opportunity and really discovered that wasn't for you. So those sort of early experiences really helped you learn what it is that you didn't want. And that was helpful as sort of doing something that you directly love, knowing what it is that you don't want to do. So spending the early years testing and learning is a good way to start. The next part was really about, the phases of going through a new role, and that tricky part in the middle where you think you've more or less got on top of it, but in fact, you've got a lot more still to learn. And sort of making sure that you're consciously aware that there are going to be challenges that pop up, and making sure that you're ready to meet those, and that your confidence doesn't trip you up in that moment. The discussion around your decision to sort of, leave a really great opportunity in China to go back to study, I think was really interesting for me, particularly to understand that it was you in the end that had to make that decision. No one could make it for you. Seeking out advice and talking it through is the first part of the journey, but eventually you have to make a choice. And so you need to be ready to take a leap of faith, and take a bet from time to time, to make sure that you keep on moving and don't get stuck in that analysis. Your advice to people that are in male-dominated industries, for women that are looking to navigate that territory, backing yourself, and making sure that you do, put yourself forward for roles where you might not be fully qualified, but that you might be able to bring additional skills to the table as well, and not letting that stop you. And that imposter syndrome is something that, we need to be definitely aware of. And I think also what I would take from that as well, if you're taking on a role where you already tick 9 out of 10 boxes, that role is not for you. You will not grow in that role. So definitely making sure that you take on opportunities where you do have that growth element to it is going to be important for your development. So again, right, if you're playing it too safe, you're not going to be growing. And the last sort of part of your sharing, I thought really, really, really meaningful, is that continuous vision of where you need to be. And again, it's not about just looking up the ladder and growing vertically. It's about really understanding where you want to be in 10 years' time and seeing what are the different experiences that you have. And I think in a way, it's very inspiring that you're continuing to really push and challenge yourself to make sure that when you do hit that, dream job in 10 years' time, you've got all of the weight behind you, all of the experience to really make sure you're a success in that role. And I think that's really definite that people need to be aware of, that careers these days are non-linear. They go sideways, they go upwards, they go downwards, they go backwards. They pause for a while while you acquire some new skills, and then you always move forward. So making sure that you're keeping a broad perspective when you're thinking about what are your options and what can you do to improve your career. There's more ways than just up. So thank you so much, Claire. I really appreciate you taking the time to really share your experience with us. And I'm sure that people listening along have learned a lot from your sharing. So thank you so much.